Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin With ReefBum. I'm your host, Keith Berkelhamer, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Richard Ross. Hey Richard, what's up, man?
Hey, how are you doing?
Good, good, good.
Excellent.
So Richard is a very, very interesting guy. I think I first became aware of Richard when I saw a picture of him with an octopus on his head and wondered, who is this guy? And here's that picture. but more on that in a little bit. Anyway, Richard has kept saltwater animals for over 30 years, has worked in the aquarium industry and trade, in maintenance, retail, and wholesale, and has consulted for a coral farm and fish collecting station in the South Pacific. He has also written an article series about skeptical reef keeping, and we'll talk about that. Has done groundbreaking work with cephalopod, did I pronounce that right? Husbandry?
You did.
Oh, cool. And has been a speaker at industry conferences, including MACNA. He also managed the 212,000-gallon reef tank in the Steinhardt Aquarium in the California Academy of Sciences and has spawned Acropora enclosed systems as part of the Albright Coral Spawning Lab/graduate work at CAS. Additionally, this is pretty cool, he won the 2015 MACNA Aquarist of the Year Award. Yeah.
I did.
And his work has been covered by Scientific American, National Geographic, Animal Planet, Penn's Sunday School, NPR's Science Friday, Discovery News, Fox News, and more. Hey, Richard, man, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. That hearing that bio read aloud makes me sound like someone I would want to listen to.
Well, a lot of people have listened to you, and we've got a whole bunch of folks that are tuning in. And Scotty Damron, thanks for tuning in. Battle OCR, Simulated Reality, John Reefer, Vermont. Who else we got? Scotty McMillan, Macy's Daddy, Braveheart Reefer 525. Hey, Greg Carroll is watching as well. So,
Hey, Greg.
Folks, really, I encourage you to ask Richard a lot of questions. We're gonna try to cover a lot of ground in the hour or so that we're gonna be on here. And I'm excited about this show. Like I mentioned, I think I first became aware of you, Richard, when I saw that picture of the octopus on your head. What's the story behind that, man? That I would have been worried that the thing would have the claw would have got into my head and would have sucked by the tentacles and all that sort of thing. But What's the story behind that?
So we were in Tonga working with a startup coral and fish collecting station that was opening up there. So we went there to help them figure out what corals would be good to collect, and also to help set up the whole station and the holding facility and the fragging and the grow out and all of that stuff. So we were out collecting one day, talking about responsible and sustainable collection, right? Because if you're going to set it up, it might as well be like that. And it was all with local guys at the time. So it was all local people, local divers. And we were out somewhere snorkeling around, and an octopus came by. And one of the guys went back up to the boat and got a claw hammer, came down, and started flipping big chunks of the reef and trying to beat this octopus with a hammer. And I was like, what? And so then we got back up to the boat, and I said, what was all that about? Because I was like, we just talked about being responsible, and you just flipped a whole bunch of the reef trying to catch this octopus. There are easier ways to catch the octopus. And they said, well, they'll bite you. If you touch them, they bite you. So that's how you have to catch them. And I said, no, they won't bite you. And I grabbed the octopus and I put it on my head. And I went, see? And luckily it didn't bite me, because it could have, but it didn't. And I pulled it off and put it away. So that's kind of the story of that picture. If that wasn't the story of that picture, I probably would not have put it in my head, or if I did, I would not have shared that picture around. But the idea that the difference that people think between, hobby collection and food collection, because they were going to eat the octopus, all of a sudden responsibility often goes out the window in the attempt to get food. So we saw another octopus later, and I showed them how to catch it just by taking a little bit of time and letting it come out by itself, essentially. And they were very impressed with that. So that was cool.
Well, octopus are very mysterious. They're animals, right? Or are they actually fish?
Yep.
They're animals. Yeah, they're very mysterious. I fear them. But so you're a brave man. But yeah, I mean, is it possible to safely keep an octopus in an aquarium without having to worry about it getting out and running along on the carpet?
It is, but you got to do a whole lot of stuff. So I actually, for the first time in a while, I have a new octopus back there.
Yeah, let's talk about what we got behind you.
That's the octopus, or the whole thing in general?
Start with the octopus, and we'll get to the rest of it. Yeah.
So the octopus is going to go in one of the tanks by itself, but the lids aren't ready yet. And it's also small, so it's okay for it to be in a critter keeper for a while. But you have to be a nut. Well, first of all, you got to be a nut to keep a reef tank, right? I mean, you just kind of got to be nutty to deal with all the things you need to deal with.
It's one thing after another, isn't it? It's always something.
One thing after another, and you're always learning something new. And the philosophy, your husbandry methodology, that philosophy that you were going with, you learn new things and go, well, that was wrong. Octopuses make that much higher, much harder. There's much more involved because they're just more complicated animals to keep. So I think I generally try to discourage people now. I wrote something for Practical Fish Keeping, which was about octopuses, which was pretty much don't, unless you are insane and are going to take all of these steps. Because the idea that an octopus was collected 10,000 miles around the world from someone, brought to their house, and then escaped because they didn't make a lid is just tragic and horrible, and we should avoid that. So if you're going to be a nut and you want an octopus, I suggest everyone goes to tonmo.com, TONMO.com, and hang out there and see what people are talking about and how to keep them and all that kind of stuff, and then decide if it's something they really want. It really shouldn't be the main problem is you never know what you're going to get, So you could get an octopus that's going to stay the size of a quarter its entire life, or that's going to be 4 feet across.
Really?
So, yeah. So you really want to know what you're doing in case something bad like that happens to you and you get animals you don't actually want.
And they can grow to a large size even in a small tank, or do you need like a large tank potentially to have a large octopus?
So they'll be very happy and outgrow a tank.
Wow.
And they grow much faster. I mean, fish will do the same thing. They can get stunted. We could go back and forth about the reality of that. But an octopus is really only living a year or 2 years. So it's going to have this incredible growth very quickly. So the idea that you're going to upgrade something when the octopus gets too big, you really don't have time for that. You kind of got to have that set up when you get the animal. So I hunted hard to get this one and contacted a collector in Florida, KP Aquatics, to get this one. It's a Octopus homolinky, and they were saying they really only see him a few times a year. So I'm very happy to get this one. And I know what it is. I know who collected it. I know the size it's going to get. So my tanks are all set up properly for them.
You know what you're getting into. Yeah, KP Aquatics. I actually got some live rock from those guys a few months ago for my new 225-gallon Peninsula tank, and it was really awesome stuff. It just came loaded with biodiversity and some little critters in there. So pretty cool stuff. So Richard, explain a little bit more in terms of, well, how about give us a little tour in terms of what's behind you besides the octopus tank.
So this is the Secret Home Lab. It's connected to my display tank. I have a 150-gallon footprint tank in the living room, which is way over there. And all the life support, the sump and everything that makes noise pretty much is under the house in the crawl space. And everything's plumbed together now. So I could run this as a standalone system, but it just, when I stopped doing cooler water animals here, it made more sense to make it one big system. So this is the Secret Home Lab. This is the new version that we redid. Sorry, I just got a glimpse of my insane COVID hair from the side on the stream.
Are you doing your own haircuts, or the wife is doing that for you?
I'm not doing any haircuts. I shave it underneath when it gets long. Otherwise, I leave it. And I've been wearing a lot of hats, but so you get to enjoy this view. Which I have no idea what it looks like until it comes up over here. So this is the new version of the lab. I had an old system, an old version that grew over 10 or 15 years, you know, with hodgepodge equipment I got from here or there. Decided if I was going to do coral spawning in here, I wanted to start clean. So we went with the aluminum stands, and I had Ben Johnson come out and he helped me set it all up, which always makes it more fun, in February of last year. So these are about 70, 80-gallon tanks. Currently, they're set up. The flow goes from the top tank to the tank below it, and then back to the sump. So it's really two kind of systems right in here. And yeah, the ones are set up for coral spawning, so I can completely close them off. I took the doors off because it's a kind of a better view with them on for a live stream. And yeah, and I really love the new system. This having them do the stands for you out of the aluminum is really pretty great and pretty easy. And yeah, and I like the whole thing is pretty clean. I've been moving stuff around and prepping for that octopus, so there's some cords and stuff dangling around where they normally aren't. I also upgraded the lights in here recently in the last week. So, and I got a new desk like I was telling you before we came on. So the office is in a little bit of flux in the Secret Home Lab right now.
Well, the Secret Home Lab is looking pretty sharp to me.
Thanks.
Should we show your video of your 400-gallon tank and
sure.
talk a little bit about that while I'm playing it? Let's.
Absolutely.
I'm going to start rolling that now, and it's probably going to take about 20 seconds or so for you to kind of see it. But I guess you can start talking about it anyway because you know it like.
Nope. So the tank is set up kind of to be a 3-zone tank. It's set up to have a lot of overhangs and caves that don't show well on the video or on photos, unfortunately. But that's really not what the tank is for. And the bottom half is really set up to be NPS, non-photosynthetic, and the top is all mostly SPS. And what you're seeing now is a feeding video. I think it's about an 8-minute video, and it shows about an hour's worth of feeding and different kinds of food. So I feed a lot. And so my nitrates, and you can see it from time to time, like right now I'm dumping in food in the back, mostly for corals, and the fish eat that as well. So my nitrates run around 50, and my phosphate runs around point, anywhere depending on where I am in the testing of the lanthanum dosing I'm doing, anywhere from like 0.2, 0.15, all the way up to 0.9. It's been as high as like 1.5. So it bounces around in there. I think the last time I tested it a month ago was 0.8, 0.95. But I feed a lot. I feel like these are animals and they need to eat, and I don't want to skimp on that. And what else do I think about that? I think algae is really a product of the lack of herbivores, and not really something you can control by messing with the parameters of the water column. I've seen too many tanks with a lot of algae and low nutrients in the water column, and too many tanks with the opposite of whatever the one I just said. So yeah, so I really like this tank. It's like 18 years old now in its current place. It's built in, yeah, and it looks much different. This is a 8-month-old video or so. The stag on the right is now, big. It's a head that's all branchy and big and nice, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with it right now. I may switch lights, so and I need to do a lot of pruning in that tank. So tonight I'm all set up to actually make a nice 1-minute video of the tank, and then in the next week go in with a bunch of tools and chop stuff up.
No, it looks beautiful. Well, 18 years. That's a very mature tank, Richard. So what are you doing in terms of lighting on that tank? Did you start with like metal halides, T5s in that tank, and migrate away from that? What's up with the lighting?
This tank started with halides, and actinic supplementation of the day. So whatever it was, it became. Now the supplementation is like the Reef Bright XHOs.
Right.
I think those are great for actinic. And then currently it's got Radeon G4 Pros on it, and that's working pretty well. But I did start with the halides. I had someone modify some of the Luminarc fixtures. So I had actually 4 bulbs, 2 bulbs in each fixture.
Oh, really?
250 watts instead of 400 watt. So I could do, the coral growing wider light that was less attractive on. But for my viewing pleasure, I could have like the Phoenix bulbs or whatever I wanted to have running. So it found it very useful for the way I like to look at my tank, to have the 4 bulbs rather than the 2.
Yeah, I still have 2 Luminarc fixtures over my 75-gallon frag tank. I run 400 watt 20K irradiant bulbs on that, and I've always been a metal halide person. So my new tank, though, is going to be the first venture for myself into the LED world. What's your thoughts in terms of the halides versus LEDs and the effectiveness of LEDs to grow coral? I mean, what have you seen in terms of your experience?
I think effective is now at this point. I think they're just as effective. That said, I still have my ballasts in place and I have my fixtures under the house. Although it's been 6 years or something since I switched over. I think though the benefits of LEDs are huge, namely in that I don't have to change bulbs every 8 months or however long people think it. I used to change them every 8 to 10 months, especially the blue ones, and that waste always bothered me. So the idea of just putting a fixture on and then it's probably good for 4 or 5 years at least seems pretty great. I'm sorry, it doesn't seem pretty great. It is great. I very much enjoyed that. Also, not worrying about a bulb shattering or getting water on it or having to clean it in quite the same way. And then, the controllability and the customizability has just gotten so good. I'm sure in a new kind of light soon, I probably won't even need the XHOs. They'll put enough blue in them in the right places that supplementation will now all be in one box, which I think will be great too.
Do you tweak a lot in terms of your lighting and the LEDs, or are you kind of like a set it and forget it type of person in terms of?
It depends on what's going on. Some of these I tweak. Now I have a virtual outlet on my controller that I can put on. Oh, I didn't do it for all of them. That lowers the light so they look better on camera like this, and then a bunch of ones where I can. That if I want to change a different view, like I have a button I press that's disco, and then it puts all the blues on, and then I look at it as really disco, because sometimes I like to look at it like that. But as the schedule goes, like the graph and the lights, which you'll find out about, well, I'm sure you know about it, but you'll experience when you get the LEDs, pretty much get that set and then leave that alone and only tweak it when I want to look at it in a different light.
How important is blue light in terms of the spectrum for SPS, would you say? Is that something, I mean, I saw certainly some hints of blue in the tank. So do you run a more of a blue spectrum than say a white spectrum?
It changes throughout the day,
yeah.
So I get all of it. But I think the blue is pretty important. In the times of metal halide, the idea of adding blue supplementation made a huge difference, I think, in the color and growth of the corals for me. That was my experience of it, so I'm a big fan of it. I think as a main driver, the corals will be fine with whatever color you prefer to look at. And I think now, especially with the LEDs, you can blend so it can look good to the eye, but you still have blue light in there. And I think that's important. I think it's important for the corals that we're keeping and the colors we like to keep them at.
Yeah, I've always been a with running the 400 watt radium bulbs, a crisp white with that hint of blue, and so it's definitely getting taking some getting used to in terms of having the bluer lighting with the LEDs. So
yeah.
But they do bring out the fluorescence in the corals, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and the main reason I was excited to move from metal halides was where I live, we get about 4 weeks where it gets above 90 degrees, 95 or so, and they're not all together. And on those days, if I wasn't paying attention or before I had a controller, if it got hot on those days and those metal halides were baking as well, the tank temperature would skyrocket. So I used to watch the we used to watch the weather forecast and turn them off before I went to work.
Really?
It was going to be a hot day. Now with controllers, they go off by themselves at whatever set point you want.
Yep. So, Richard, in terms of the calcium and alkalinity supplementation for that tank, are you using a calcium reactor? Are you using 2-part Kalkwasser?
Calcium reactor. I think at a certain size, it becomes not cost effective to run 2-part. Although I've got a bunch of ESV downstairs because I was thinking of trying to run them both at the same time. But I may or may not do that now. But yeah, the calcium reactor works pretty well. And it keeps everything where I want it to be.
There's been a lot of conversation, in the reef keeping community, it seems like, about pH, and a lot of people that run calcium reactors will, try to get that pH to go up. What do you do with your, do you have an issue with pH in your tank running that calcium reactor? And if so, what do you do to try to boost it up a little bit?
I bubble in outside air into the sump, and I actually just did a pH test because the tanks behind me don't get a very high turnover from the sump. They probably turn over 2 or 3, maybe 4 times a day. So I was curious if the pH was going to drop, especially in the winter here. Now everything is closed, all the windows. And I ran the pH with a pH pen. It's the same in all the tanks. So that's not an issue. I think a lot of the pH problems I see people talk about are from closed windows, not really from the calcium reactor effluent.
Right.
My effluent also goes through a cup of crushed coral to help react and off gas as well, so it has to filter through that. But I think most of the problems I see are from closed windows, and I see people doing various things like CO2 absorbing media, which works, but you got to keep up on it. It's like a UV sterilizer to me. If you're not kind of on top of it all the time, you're going to create fluxes that I think are maybe worse than just leaving it alone by itself. But every time I've talked to anybody who's had a problem and they're able to run outside air, I have an actual air pump outside, and it just pumps into the sump and bubbles and moves everything around. Every time I've seen somebody do that, it seems to up the pH by 0.2 or so. But pH is also one of those weird ones. You don't really need to hunt it. You know, a pH of 7.8 is fine if that's what your tank settles out at. You know, but if you want to raise it, there are some studies that show it makes a difference, whether it's a lot or a little. That's a different question. But I think pumping in air from the outside is the way to go.
Yeah, I just had an air exchange unit installed in my basement. I have my tanks in a finished basement here in Vermont. So and we just had that installed last week, and I could tell you, it's just in terms of breathing, I could feel the fresh air in the room, and it did elevate the pH a little bit. I mean, I have to kind of like go now and look at the data in terms of the pH and what I was getting before, you know, we had the unit installed versus now, but just physically, I could really feel that difference, and it's just not as stuffy and musty down here. So I'm assuming that it's got to help. That's got to help.
Yeah, when I added those lines into the sump, I went from around 8.0, 7.9, 8.0 to like a steady 8.2, 8.3.
Yeah.
I've got a cycle there, you know, but that was kind of the average. I was actually really surprised that it made that big a difference.
So do you? There seems to be some different information out there, but you know, I have a dual chamber calcium reactor, and the reason why is because I feel like the second chamber can kind of help absorb some of that CO2. Do you think a second chamber in a calcium reactor does make a difference? Is it worth it?
I haven't seen it in my own experience, but it may. I haven't seen anybody do a real nice experiment showing, you know, the different pHs coming out of there or not. I certainly don't think it would hurt. But for me, I would rather spend the money on a bigger single reactor chamber than two smaller ones. I'd rather load it up, get it running, and leave it for a long time.
Right.
But I like to try to be the right kind of lazy. I just know that about myself now in keeping reef tanks.
All right, well, that's a good lead in there, Richard, because you wrote you gave a talk at MACNA in 2017 called "The Right Kind of Lazy." What was like the gist of that talk?
The gist was have an understanding of how you think everything in your system works. And then you can decide how to automate or set it up in such a way that you can ignore it for long stretches of time. If you don't have an understanding of how you think each piece of equipment works and what you're trying to get, even if you're wrong, I don't care if you're wrong, but as long as you're not following someone else's recipe, I think you can tweak it to be as lazy as you want it to be. I don't want to mess with a bunch of stuff. I don't want to crawl around under my house. I've always been like this. I remember once someone gave me a lot of crap for putting a picture up with a lot of salt creep. And it was like, what about the salt creep? And it's like, I don't care about the salt creep because the cover goes down. We don't see that. I care about looking in the tank. I don't want to be a slave to cleaning salt creep. And it's fine if somebody else does. That's what's the beauty of this hobby. I think you can set it up how you like it. So it's just, it's understanding your philosophy and looking for ways to make it lazy. So one of the things would be pH. I would plumb in outside air. I also run Kalk, but I don't think that does much. But I would run outside air if that fixes the problem for me, other than, you know, as opposed to a CO2 scrubber, because I don't have to do anything to the air.
Right.
The scrubber I have to pay attention to. So stuff like that. You know, automatic water changes, or, you know, I've got a big Skimmate collection bucket. So, you know, I know how much comes out and comes in, but I don't have to pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to try to, when I build a system out, and especially the plumbing, I spend the extra time in doing that plumbing. I like to hard plumb my tanks to the sump. And, you know, so for this new 225 gallon Peninsula tank, I spent like 40 hours hard plumbing that tank to the sump. And part of the reason why was because I wanted to set up a system to make water changes really, really easy. So the two return pumps in that sump also, one of them acts as a pump to pump the water out of the sump into a slop sink. So I could do like a 30-gallon water change in like 5 minutes. And yeah, I think that probably is something that I want to spend as little time as possible on the maintenance side of things. And I think it's important to try to, put a little extra work in the on the front end to try to achieve that goal. So I think that kind of fits into your right kind of lazy thing.
100%. I spent 6-8 months designing the new lab here and how it was going to work and how water was going to flow and how I was going to be able to change it if I needed to. And I do the same thing. I now have a 500-gallon cistern outside for salt water. And then under the house, I've got the 200-gallon cistern. And I flip switches and pumps go, and I can watch it on video, and I don't have to lug buckets of salt around. And, I think you're going a great direction, and I can't wait to see the system once it's up. It sounds like you're setting it up really nice.
It is up and running right now. It's been going for like three months. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm definitely.
Is it keeping animals yet? You got corals in it?
Not yet. I'm gonna probably another few weeks, but I've got some good coralline algae growing in there right now, and I've got 20 fish in there right now. I think the biology is good. The parameters are good. So I want to make sure that I got a handle on this tank before I start putting some animals in it in terms of the corals. I think that's also important with reef keeping, is to really kind of, when you start a new system, there's going to be some quirky things, right, that are going to happen with that system. So I think it's good to take a few months and just learn it before you start throwing a ton of stuff in there. And that's just my philosophy. But
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I remember we used to say, set it all up, get it running, leave it dark for a month.
Yeah.
Once it's cycled, leave it dark for a month. Then we used to avoid algae. So yeah, I think taking your time on the setup is a good way to go. Although some people are saying now that, instant cycling is working for them. So great if that's working. If I was setting up a new system, I would do what you were doing, because I just don't want to get into a fight.
I took a cue actually from Greg Carroll, who's watching right now. He, with his new tank, he told me that I think he had basically waited 4 months before he started adding corals to that new tank, and had the lights on about 10% of their intensity. So I'm kind of following a similar blueprint on this tank, and yeah, I think
it's great.
Patience. Patience.
Exactly. What are you rushing for?
Yes.
Yes. You just spent a huge chunk of money for this big system. Calm down.
Right.
It's going to be beautiful. It will.
Just
I agree.
Let it organically evolve. So I have a couple of questions, Richard, from some of the viewers, and I'm going to ask you some more questions. And speaking of Greg, he's asking, are you still running the coral spawning lab at CAS, or is everything now at your house?
This is my own spawning lab. I'm part of I'm part of a lab at CAS now. I'm not part of the aquarium anymore. So I'm doing the science there more than any of the day-to-day work, which is why I set this lab up here. Also, having 100% control of something is a lot better than having 10% control of it. So so now if I want to change a pump, I change a pump, instead of having to get approval from 12 people about a pump. But the system at CAS is going well. We're prepping for the spawn coming up in April. And so we've got two. I've got this one set to go hopefully sometime in October or November, depending on when I can get, I got to talk to Joe, new brood stock. But yeah, so the benefit of it is, I wouldn't want it to spawn in April as well. I would lose my mind. Spawning is a really intense time. It takes a lot to pay attention to, and having two systems spawning in two different locations would make me a little crazy and tired.
So now, what's the purpose of you doing coral spawning experiments? What's the purpose behind that?
Doing it here?
Yeah.
I want to understand it more. I want to show people that it can be done at home. Jamie Craggs has already done it from Frags pretty much, so we know it's doable. It's something cool to do. And, the idea of being able to supply captive bred corals just seems like a good direction to go in. So, it's a bunch of work, but I want to keep kind of plugging at it and actually seeing, how lazy can I get at it? is kind of part of the real question. There's nobody's research grant involved in what's going on at home. So if they don't spawn for me, that just means they don't spawn for me. Whereas at work, I would be, at the academy or in the lab, I'd be the not secret lab. I'd be freaking out, trying to make sure everything is perfect, because if it doesn't work, that impacts future funding.
Interesting. I mean, what could this mean for the industry if this is something that can be, done without too much, I guess, cost involved and too much labor involved?
It means that we would be able to be smarter about our wild collection. Although mariculture is fantastic, it also means we could crossbreed stuff. I mean, there's so many implications, So if we're breeding corals to try to get corals that are better adapted to higher temperatures and lower pHs for reef restoration, we can do the same kinds of things for home tanks. The thing that's going to be the weird part for the hobby is going to be grow out. So it's about a year before the settled corals become something that you might want to sell.
Right.
Maybe 8 months. But you really want them to get going. So what I actually think at this point might be a really good direction is you spawn once, and then in 2 or 3 years, you can spawn those corals again, or you start taking frags from those parent colonies. So now we've taken almost nothing from the wild. You can do that locally at each spot, so there's no shipping, there's no styrofoam or plastic bags. It's all kind of local. There's a whole lot of benefits. Plus, the understanding on its own, what got me into reef keeping at all was just I wanted to understand it better for myself. So that's what really goes on in the lab here at the secret lab.
The secret lab. So you mentioned that mariculture is really going well. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So instead of going out and collecting wild colonies, mariculture places are supposed to, I don't know what kind of follow-up and enforcement is actually being done, but let's say everyone's a good player. They collect fragments, they grow them out into parent colonies out in the ocean, and then they take fragments of those parent colonies and put them on some kind of movable substrate, grow those out, and then sell them to the trade. Super awesome. You can set it up in spots where you're not impacting anything. It's out of the way. The wild reefs are doing wild reef things, and you're taking far fewer stuff off of the reef. Now, I think wild collection can be great if it's done responsibly. That's a hard thing to police. So a lot of places are saying, we don't want you to do any wild collection, but there's a roadmap to cultured stuff.
Do you know what percentage in the United States, in terms of what's imported in the United States, is mariculture versus wild?
I think most of it is mariculture now, but the answer is no. You want to talk to Andy Ryan for that, or look it up. It might be in one of his papers, but that data is hard to get. That data is hard to parse. That's one of the big problems with the hobby right now, in the industry right now. I'm going to say industry, not hobby. I think those are two different things. Is getting that kind of data. But just anecdotally, I've seen a steady increase in mariculture, more and more. Locally here in my neck of the woods in the San Francisco Bay Area, mostly the only wild stuff I see, in SPS at least, is coming out of Australia. And Australia's a pretty well-managed fishery. So I'm not really worried about that. They rotate their zones, and they've got people watching them, so they're not sneaking around so much. Yeah. Is
global warming a concern in the mariculture industry right now? Is that something that we should be worried about, or are they able to pivot based on the temperatures that are impacting the areas where they're having their farms set up?
Oh, climate change is going to impact it completely. All of us are going to be impacted by that, and the thing that we may start seeing is more countries just going no, because these animals are now going to become endangered. If the temperature keeps going up, their habitats are going to be in trouble, And we might see countries saying, you know, well, we don't want you to collect them anymore because they're already under stresses. You know, there's arguments about collecting them to keep them in tanks, to keep them as an ark. You know, if that's going to be a hobby thing, I think we're going to need to make a much better case for hobbyists doing that kind of thing. But we've got these huge facilities now, like Worldwide Corals and Unique Corals. No reason they can't just buy another space and do more culturing there. But yeah, it's definitely something to worry about. And as local pressures get higher, food fishing is going to get more intense. And yeah, we should all be paying attention to climate change and how it's going to be impacting us. I mean, Hawaii just got closed down, not partially because of climate change. That's a sub-argument that they have, amongst all their other terrible arguments. But if Hawaii, the most well-managed fishery that we know about, gets closed down, we should be paying attention because it's getting closed down from emotional arguments, not data. And that's what shut Indo down a couple of years ago. So yeah, I think it behooves the industry and the trade to get out ahead of that. Otherwise, they could lose their livelihoods. Hobbyists will just move on to a different hobby. That's why I think it's a little weird to try to put the onus for sustainability and responsibility on the hobbyist. Hobbyists don't have skin in the game in the way the industry and the trade does. So hobbyists just, we're going to move on to guppies. It's just a different hobby.
Start breeding these wild variants of these guppies like clownfish, right? That'll be the next big hot thing.
Well, we've already got crazy long-finned clownfish.
I know. So I can't believe how many different types of clownfish are out there. It's just kind of mind-boggling. I'm into clownfish and all that stuff, but now the choices are just make it much more difficult to figure out what kind of clownfish you want. But I don't know. I think maybe I'm an old-school guy, so I kind of like the simple stuff.
Yeah, me too. Some of the, and there's so many different ones to choose from. It's like, Juggalo, reverse, Black Storm. I can't keep up with that. Oh, I just want to add, I do think wild collection is important and can be done responsibly and sustainably, and I think it should be. And I think now with what's going on with COVID, we're seeing price hikes for different reasons, but I think we're starting to see animals, wild collected, starting to cost what they probably should have been costing for the last decade or so. So, does that mean, it's going to be harder to get some stuff for everybody? Yeah, but I'm okay with that. I don't think like butterflies that only eat coral, should be supermarket style at the LFS.
Right.
I think if somebody really wants to work with one of those, it could be collected to order. So I'd like to see more of that happening. I think that would be better for all of us long term.
It's interesting. It's just in terms of talking about coral and specifically like SPS. When I first started in the hobby 25 plus years ago, I mean, it was all about getting wild collected corals into the LFS and picking up some colonies and putting it in the tank. I mean, there was very little trading going on in terms of frags and you just didn't see what you have today. So yeah. It's interesting how it's changed and how people have a different philosophy now, and most tanks are started with frags versus the colonies because there's very few wild colonies that are brought in. The mariculture stuff, like you mentioned, is awesome, but you would think that there's enough floating around out there right now that that could be sustainable in terms of not having to bring in new pieces and relying on that stuff for the hobby. I mean, is that something? Is that wishful thinking at this point in time that there's enough stuff floating around out there to sustain the hobby?
No, I think we could do it. I think what happens is that the wild stuff is just so inexpensive.
Right.
And I think incorrectly inexpensive. And you buy a cheap copper band butterfly, but you're going to buy it 3 or 4 times to get one that lives. So it's not really cheaper in the long run unless you get lucky, which people like to think they're going to get lucky. So yeah, I think it could be done. Every attempt that I've seen so far to set up a green shop, there was one here called Green Marine. They do good for about 6 months to a year, and then the reality sets in that most hobbyists are shopping on price.
Yeah.
And what's available. So if there's another store that's got frags that are cheaper, they're going to buy one or two here, but they're going to buy the bulk over there. So I think it could be done. I think it's a pricing thing. You see the same thing with the fish, the captive bred fish.
Right.
You want to buy a captive bred coral beauty from Biota for, I'm making up numbers, $70, or you're going to go buy one, from a bag lot sale for $20. I think you want to buy the one from Biota. It's better for the hobby. It's better for the world. But it's hard to get people to do that. And most people, don't even know. They just go to the store and buy whatever they're buying because it's a hobby.
Right. Right. Exactly. So I'm going to take another question from the viewers here, Richard. John Reef from Vermont, fellow Vermonter. I'm about to add algae to my refugium. I'm debating between Chaeto and leafy spear or Ogo. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. What are your thoughts?
I like Chaeto. I know what it's going to do. I know how it's going to grow. I know how I'm going to harvest it. Some of the leafy stuff likes to be attached more than growing, but it all depends on what your goal is. Personally, I don't think that. Let the comments slay me. I don't think that algae is a particularly great way of dealing with water quality issues. All the experiments I've done here, they really just don't impact it to any degree that makes it feel like it's useful. I've run a scrubber here for 2 years. It didn't do anything. And of course, every 6 months when I checked in, it's like, oh, well, set it up this way now. It's like, but I did it the way you said. But that said, I'm still growing a bunch of Chaetomorpha down under the house. I got probably a 20 by 30 by, section that's lit by a radion. And I pull out, half a 5-gallon bucket every 3 weeks. It's still not really impacting my my oomph. So it's, I would say for a refugium, it's whatever you like.
So when you say that you haven't found it to be, maybe I'm using the wrong word here, but not effective or maybe not impactful in terms of algae with your systems, are you saying that you find that it's not pulling out the nitrates and phosphates? You're not really seeing a difference in those levels in your system while you're running macro?
Correct.
Okay. So
what do you? And maybe it may be my lazy. There's a lot of people. Jason Langer, he makes skimmers, and we have a semi-private discussion that he and a few of us are having because we're trying to understand. Does it really work? We've been having this conversation for 15 years, and I am not. The math is there, but what it is you need so much out. It's got to be a lot. Even the BRS videos that showed, if you've got a 30-gallon tank and you fill it with Chaeto, you're going to keep your nutrients down. But that's a 30-gallon tank with algae. If you want to have a 30-gallon tank and then a 40-gallon tank, and the 30-gallon tank's your reef and the 40-gallon tank's all algae, that might be a great way to go. But I think some of the smaller ones, I'm just not seeing the evidence that they're really impactful. Now, I was about to say, it might be an artifact of my lazy reefing, and perhaps if you set up a system, although I've seen some other people who are similar to me who are also reporting, just not a budge on the numbers. But it may have something to do with all paying attention to everything else in a way differently than I pay attention to things.
Do you think it's the corals that are doing the legwork in terms of absorbing up the phosphates and the nitrates? Do you think that your tank is packed full with corals, and over the years, have you found that perhaps maybe that's what macro has not been working for?
Well, my levels are really high. I did a whole talk about it, and it was like, with these levels, my tank should look like crap.
Right.
So, there are some things, I think it's true to a large extent that everyone's corals adapt to the conditions that they're given in everyone's tank. And that's, you're going to lose corals as you try to get them to live in your tank. Not everything's going to do well. So I think my tank has just got different parameters than other people's tanks. I've still got a lot of coral. It grows. It might grow a little slower. It doesn't really bother me so much. But I don't know how to quantify that. So I just don't see that those numbers don't seem to be the devil in the way that some people seem to think they are. So, and that all happened from me, just becoming lazy when I started my old job and just didn't have time to keep up on GFO. And 6 months went by, and then I tested phosphate, and it was through the roof, but everything looked the same. So,
yeah, Deep Reef says, hello from Singapore. Question, does Rich still run crazy high phosphates? I think you answered that question. What's crazy high phosphates for you?
Right. The last time I tested it was 0.92.
Wow.
Which is quite a bit different than the 0.05.
Yeah.
The 0.05 people seem to think is the right target. And, baby corals growing up just fine. The evidence for the skeletal structure being compromised seems low. I'm just not seeing much of it. So
what are you doing right now for any nutrient export going on right now at all in your tanks?
I got a skimmer, and I carbon dose, but I think that's more of a food source. And I am actually dripping lanthanum for about 1.5 years now, I guess. Maybe it's even longer. Because I'm lazy, I'm not going to drip lanthanum into a 10 micron sock that I've got to change every day. So I talked with Craig Bingman, a bunch about it 2 years ago, and we decided to run it into my skimmer. So it's kind of, very low dose. I think I run 30 or 40 mil of lanthanum into 3,000 or 4,000 mil of DI, and then that drips into the skimmer through the neck right into the water. At about 30 or 40 mil of that mixture a day. So I'm about to get a little more aggressive on it to see if I can bring it down. But for the last 6 months, I've been feeding like crazy here because of the baby corals.
What's your advice to somebody that has an algae issue in their tank that's got very high phosphates and nitrates, and the tank is obviously not in balance like your tank is, where it can sustain those high levels? What's your advice to somebody that is in that position? Try to get
herbivores, including you. You are probably, on most tanks, to get it going, the major herbivore that needs to do the work. When I set these up, I went through a cycle. I would set these up and then went to Palau for 3 weeks on field work. And I came back, and 2 of the tanks were full of long algae, just covered. I took a canister filter, a hang-on tank canister filter, set that up. I pulled out all the algae I could with my hands. I scraped all the algae off of everything that I could, scrubbed it with a toothbrush, netted as much of it out, and then let the filter take the rest of it out over a couple days. Didn't bother with anything else. It wrapped around corals, but then it came loose again and got sucked up by the filter. So that was like 2 days of paying attention to that. And then I added more herbivores again, and never had the problem come back.
So you're an advocate of natural means in terms of eradicating algae.
Yeah, I think the mistake people make is letting it become eutrophic. Letting it phase change into an algae tank. Look, algae and cyano, they all grow in the same conditions coral grow in. So it's no surprise that they're going to show up, and you're going to need to do something about them. You've got to win and let corals take a bigger role in your substrate covering, and that isn't like a set it and forget it. You don't just drop one kind of snail in there and hope it works. I've got urchins, I've got snails, I've got fish, and you've got to then keep the algae crop down so those animals can actually get it. If you've got long wavy algae and you're expecting an animal to take care of it for you, it's just not going to happen in a small tank for sure. So I think it's getting ahead of it and then being smart about it, I think, or just shifting your thinking to, I've got to do this kind of work, which is a funny thing for the lazy guy to say. But in the long run, you know, that few hours I did of work was way easier. I just had cyano in these two tanks, and I just put them dark for 3 days, and it's gone. And I had it in this bottom tank as well, and that's why it's so dim in there. I'm just bringing the lights back on today, but I'll tell you, the cyano's gone after 3 days. Once it gets a foothold, you got to kick it in the pants, and then you can get by it. But it's your herbivores that are going to keep your algae away, but that's a mix, and it's going to be different for everybody's tank. So you've got to kind of play with it to get the right stock that you want.
What about chemicals as a quick fix, like ChemiClean, fluconazole? What are your thoughts on those, and do you think that those potentially could have long-term impact on the biology of a tank?
Well, I've done ChemiClean a couple times. We did ChemiClean on the big tank at the academy once. That was a lot of ChemiClean to add.
They must have loved you for that order.
Yeah, they did. I think it's I had to sign an NDA actually on that. I think chemicals have their place, but I think we go to them too quick. I think we've got this idea that we want magic in a bottle, and as you point out, I think magic all has its price. If you've just spent 4 months letting your bacterial populations, you know, calm down and populate and stabilize, and then you're going to dump antibiotic into the tank, you're definitely going to have an effect. Whether that's a good or a bad effect, or no effect, or no effect that you actually see, it's going to kill stuff. That's what it does. Right. So if you can avoid that, you know, I think that's a better way to go. I think going to a bottled product as your first step, I think long term is a stunting thing for you as a reef keeper.
Yeah.
But I think the goal of being a reef keeper is becoming a better keeper. And some people, that's not the goal. Some people's goal is to have a nice tank and they want it clean fast. You know, with some of the stuff people add, I'm still seeing about 50-50 success. And in there, I'm still seeing way too many stories about bad things happening that would make me trepidatious about adding those things to my tank. You know, but then I also know a lot of people that I respect who have used those things and say they work great.
Right. Yep. What are your thoughts on dino flagellates? I mean, back when I first started in the hobby, you know, there was pretty much you started a tank with live rock, and these days a large majority of the tanks are dry rock tanks that, you know, get started with dry rock. And I tried starting a tank with dry rock once only, and I had one problem after another, including the dinos. So it just seems like there's more folks out there that are having that issue with their tanks, and I don't know if it's related to the lack of biodiversity in the dry rock versus the live rock, but what's your advice to folks out there that are battling that demon? I mean, those things can really you know, kick you in the pants.
Yeah. When I had him in the last version of this system, I tried a bunch of stuff and then turned the lights off for 4 days and then never had them again. Light dusting here and there, but you know, I was getting snotty stuff. But you know, with the tank that you were saying that you had it on, did you do the long ramp up?
No.
You know, or did you go? Yeah. See, I think you're going to have progressions of dominance in the tank. And you know, we used to talk about this in the 80s and 90s. It's like you're going to go through these phases,
right?
And just know that they're going to happen. So you know, if you get dinos now in your tank, in your big tank, you just shut off the lights for a while, and they'll go away, and you'll restart it back up again and see if they come back or not again. It's when these pests get a foothold, then they can take over, and then they become very hard to eradicate. But if you see them coming, it's a little bit, you know, I get dinos in my tanks on some of the sand and cyano sometimes in small amounts. I generally don't care. I'm not going to nuke the tank because of that. Right. So I think patience and figuring out a game plan, you know, if you want to nuke it from space and nuke it early.
Right.
You know, whether that's the 4 or 5 days of being closed or doing whatever treatment you want to do, or you know, if you got rocks that you can remove, your algae and dino problems become really easy because you just swap rocks out as that happens if you need to.
Right.
So I think there's things to do, but I think it's patience. I think it's really patience.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of folks have success with upping the nutrients, so they dirty up the tank, raise the nitrates and the phosphate, and then also run UV at night when you know, the dinos, I guess, are in the water column, and that seems to work for folks.
Great. These things that seem to work for folks, I would love to see simple studies done with them. People talk, you know, whenever I say this, or often people go, we're not going to do a peer-reviewed study. I don't want a peer-reviewed study. I want a nice piece of evidence that you would accept from another reefer. That's more than I did this and it seemed to work. So there's very, you know, simple ways to do it, to record it, and so we all can get better at knowing what each person did. I hate it to become like some of the, you know, the ginger for treating ick is still a thing that won't die. And there's just no evidence of it at all. So I'm not saying none of these things work. I'm saying for me to think they're going to work, or for me to want to try them, I need more than just somebody said it does.
Anecdotal. Yeah, you need more than
and
that.
Anecdote, you can do an anecdotal study in a way that's more compelling, you know, but saying I did this and things looked better, most of the time, you know, that doesn't mean anything. Plus, I need to know all the other 20 things that you did to fight the dinos at the same time.
Right. There's a lot of variables.
So, yeah, and people tend to say what worked is the last thing they tried, or the thing that cost them the most money. Negating, of course, the 2 months that they've been fighting it already, and changing a bunch of things. So again, you know, not saying these things don't work. I'm saying we need more compelling evidence so we can move forward in a way that's not hodgepodge. We can be consistent and we can understand, and then maybe we can actually get to reef recipes for some of these things.
There you go. All right, so another question from a viewer, Richard, Macy's daddy. Richard, have you ever tested, this is, I guess, a biology question, have you ever tested the microbiome in your tanks? And what do you think of new services that will map that for you?
Yeah, Aquabiomics, when they started, or Aquabiomics, I think that's what they're called. We did a couple of runs of actually, we did a tank from the secret lab, and we did the main tank to compare, because that's kind of an interesting thing. You know, I had some stuff, I'd have to dig it out to see what it actually was. I had some stuff that seemed that other people didn't have. But, you know, I think that's neither here nor there. I think it's got the potential to be really useful and interesting. I think we just don't know enough microbiomically. I think I just made that word up. I think we don't know enough yet to be able to make any decisions about anything. So I think it's really interesting data. And the guy running that site is a scientist and keeping all that data and looking for trends and things. So I think if we keep throwing tests into that bank, we'll eventually get some useful stuff out of it. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, another question from Deep Reef. What are Rich's thoughts on adding bacteria to the tank?
I have mixed thoughts of that. So, you know, when something, because again, where's the evidence, the compelling evidence that it works? And unfortunately, for me, I think there's way too much non-compelling evidence, so it makes it hard for me to see the signal through the noise in that stuff. That said, you know, when things are going bad in my tank and I'm feeling awful, I'll buy a bottle of bacteria, because pouring a bottle of something into my tank that's supposed to help makes me feel like I did something. And I guess there's also the idea that inoculating with different bacterial strains is probably not a bad thing. Although it seems like, you know, some strains are going to win. So I don't think by adding some stuff like that, we're going to get a shift. And I don't even know if you'd want to shift. We just don't know that yet. But I tend to look at it once in a while like a diversity thing. You know,
Gotcha.
I do want to add, why not add more? Just like I add pods, you know, rock I don't swap around so much anymore because there's pests that I don't want. But yeah, yeah, that's what I think. I'm just going to babble some more so I can stop myself.
So Greg Carroll has a question. What does Richard think about nano bubble scrubbing?
He's just trying to get my goat. I, I think there's no compelling evidence that that is a useful thing to do, except to flocculate. Basically, turn your tank into a skimmer. So if you put small bubbles into your tank and stir everything up, it's going to attract that goo in the same way as your skimmer attracts that goo, which then you can export. But that's something we've known about. But you get something very similar if you just storm the tank with a baster or a power head and filter that stuff out as well. So yeah, nanobubbles. There's just the evidence. The evidence is almost like the evidence for the Aqua Equalizer or Eco Aqualizer. It's just I've seen nothing compelling, and I've looked really, really hard.
Gotcha. This is an interesting question. ATF in the house. Out of the testing being done for COVID, do you see technologies in testing for other fish diseases in our water, in our tanks?
Sure. As any of that science gets better, there will be eventual applications for us. As it becomes cheaper, really, is what matters. You know, and the mRNA stuff, I think, will be really interesting. That's not my field, so I don't know much about it. But, you know, just any science of testing at levels like that is going to benefit us at some point in the future.
Gotcha. So, Richard, we were talking a little bit about live rock versus dry rock, and there's been like this whole shift in the hobby in terms of aquascaping with dry rock and these negative space aquascapes, these really cool, interesting shapes, you know, with dry rock that you can, you know, spend your time just really crafting things and just these hellacious aquascapes are pretty amazing and all that sort of thing. What are your thoughts about that sort of thing with dry rock? And if you had the choice between the dry rock and live rock starting a tank, what would you go with?
If I had my choice,
given the supply of live rock these days.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I think essentially there is none, so you're not going to get it. I was just talking about Matt Peterson, and we were trying to figure out if there is any actual live rock coming, or if it's all cultured like you got out of Florida now. I think that's the case. Yeah. Even when we could get live rock, I wanted cured live rock. You know, I thought the risk of getting bad stuff is pretty high. So when I would get live rock in, I would put it in a tank, you know, with the air bubbler and water motion for a month or two before I used it anyway, and let the bacterial turgor push all the stuff out and, you know, get it nice and ready. But I like the shapes.
Yeah, the stuff that I got in has got amazing coralline algae on it. Amazing.
Yeah.
And it also certainly came in with a lot of critters on it. But one of the things that I did, I followed the advice on their website, is to do several dips in very high specific gravity water, like between 1.035 and 1.040. And it worked. I mean, it flushed a lot of stuff out. I mean,
yeah.
So,
yeah.
But not everything.
Thing. And then if you go with just, you know, dry rock, you're starting from nothing. So it's two just different ways of getting the same thing. You know, the crafting of the tank, I remember setting up the display tank and spending so much time with how it's going to look, and, you know, and then in a year it's just covered with coral anyway. So it almost,
that's what I keep telling people. I was like, you know what, you spend all that time making this awesome, cool aquascape, but if you're going to do it right, the coral's going to cover it up anyway in the long run, right?
Yeah. So I kind of look at it now like squinty, so it's fuzzy, and I get nice basic shapes, and then figure and imagine how the coral is going to go on that. You know, but I think some of the tanks are cool. Some of the with the arches and the floating stuff. There's a lot of cool stuff going on.
I know.
Again, it depends on your goal. I'm setting up a tank that's going to be here for 20 years. You know, if I lived in an apartment and I might be moving in 3 years, I certainly would be more interested in having it look really good sooner, and then knowing that, you know, I was going to break it down. So it's all your different goals. There's no one size fits all in this hobby.
So, Richard, I want to be cognizant of your time. I don't want to take up too much more of your time tonight. This has been awesome, and again, and thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I can go on asking you a ton more questions, and well, maybe we'll have you come back and
I'd love to.
and talk some more. But I don't know. In terms of advice to somebody that's been in the hobby and wants to kind of like take it to the next level and is been having some fits and starts, what are some of the more important things a hobbyist should think about in terms of kind of getting to that next level or getting over that hump in terms of having success?
It really taking a look at your husbandry methodology, what, and your not your methodology, your philosophy. And if you don't know what your husbandry philosophy is, think about what that is, because you've got one. And then taking a look at that and seeing what you believe that is supported and what you believe just cause. And then start looking at what you think you can pull out or add to that. So I think it's all about examining where you're coming from and why, and then filling in those gaps with information. And so I think if you want to jump up, befriend people who have long-term tanks or whatever you're trying to copy or emulate, and see what they're doing, and have more esoteric, broader discussions about what and why and how, rather than looking for recipes.
Right. If you're looking for that silver bullet, then you're going to be kind of going down a rabbit hole, I think.
I think so too. I think that I think I call it magic in a bottle, and I think, or magic. And like I said before, in magic and all classical magic, everything has a price. And so if you're using it and you don't know why, something's changing somewhere else. So yeah, I think that, and figure out what you want. What do you want? And then figure out how to make that. So if you're trying to jump up and you're going to a bigger tank, talk to a bunch of people with bigger tanks. If you want a tank that's going to last for a long time, talk to people who have got tanks that have lasted for a long time, and find out, oh, I don't need to spend so much time on my aquascape because that's not going to matter. Or, oh yeah, wow, I better put these outlets, if I'm having them installed, I'm going to have them put up on the wall instead of down at the bottom, because that's going to make my life easier. It's going to keep everything away. Oh, I could put all my electrical on a shelf above the tank, so if there's any flood at all, I have no risk of bad things happening.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of little things like that are practical and really useful. And then there's the husbandry philosophy that, everyone's got to have an understanding of what they're doing, and that moves as you move through time.
Right.
So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
It did. I think my takeaway from that is to really make sure that you have a game plan in terms of husbandry and maintenance, and take care of the little things, because you got to be really organized, and you got to really even though you say that you're a lazy reefer, I understand it's a different type of lazy, right? And you gotta kind of like set the platform, and you gotta have that solid foundation, right?
That's it. The right kind of lazy is setting up your foundation so you can be lazy later on.
Simulated reality. Thank you very much. That was very kind. Great stream. Thank you very much. That was awesome. Really appreciate that. Well,
you're welcome,
Richard.
Can I plug something?
Yeah.
I got two podcasts that I'm doing because they're fun. One is called The Skim Mate.
Somebody asked about
Terrence
that.
Bugatti. And one is called, can I say a bad word on your show? Or do you not do that? Talking Reef S with Ben Johnson.
That's fine.
And you can get, and I'm just enjoying those because there's no sponsors and there's no beholdenness, and it's just kind of straight, and they're really kind of fun.
So how can folks find those streams?
On Facebook, you can find Talking Reef S, and on the web, you can just look up the Skim Mate podcast. Or I think the one with Ben is now on my YouTube channel, which is Cephhead, and you can find that there.
Are you on Instagram? You're on Instagram as well, right, Sephead?
I am. I think I'm Cephhead on Instagram, but I haven't. I don't look at Instagram as much as I should.
Gotcha.
Thank you for my shameless plugs.
Plug away, Richard, man. I mean, I am very much appreciative of you being a guest and taking the time. Any final thoughts for the folks out there?
My website, The Rich Ross, which is easier to remember. Yeah. That's getting a revamp in the next week.
Oh, good.
And then you should be able to find all that stuff there. Any last thoughts? Forums are wonderful and terrible places. Use them with caution. And vet people who give you easy answers. Yeah, I think it's a great fun hobby. We should enjoy it, and being responsible and calling out bad players who are making it possible that the hobby is in danger for the rest of us is a good thing. But enjoy it, be responsible, because we love the animals. Why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah, you just brought up something that I was going to talk about with you, but perhaps we could talk about the next time we have you on. The folks, check it out on Richard's site, the love letter to the hobby, right? That's what it's called.
Right. Yeah, that's on reefs.com as well. Love letter to the a love letter to the hobby.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, and I certainly recommend reading that. That makes a good read.
Thank you very much. I worked hard on that.
Well, Richard, listen, thanks again, man, for being a guest, and hope to have you back again. So that will do it, folks, for this show. And my next show will be, I'm going to plug here, next Thursday, January 28th at 7 p.m. Another great guest, Michael Paletto, will be on. So we'll pick it up in another week. But until then, be safe, be well, and we'll see you next time.
Right on. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Richard.